Welcome to the Dylan Experience, and today is episode 61. I've got another special guest for you today. But before we get to that special guest, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you need to do to stay in touch with the podcast so you can keep in touch. My guest today is the author of the #1 best-selling book, Seen and Unheard, a life coach who builds confidence in women who struggle with being seen and heard in their own lives. Turning her own life around at 57, she has made it her mission to turn her mess into her message. She has built her brand new mobile app called ConfidentU. My guest is Patricia Love. Patricia, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
Awesome. It's a great day in Seattle. It's all I know.
Absolutely. It's fairly beautiful here in Wisconsin. Sometimes it gets cold, sometimes it gets hot. We'll see. It's kind of bipolar today, but
it sounds like Seattle. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it's not. Right. Today it's not.
So Patricia,
Yes.
there's a lot to unpack here. One, I've never met a person that's really digging into building an app. But you've written a book, changing your life at 57, right? I've got a lot of questions, but
Sure.
I want to hear kind of your story of like, how did you get to that point of wanting to change your life at 57 of all ages? So kind of walk me through how we got here.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder how I got there also, to be honest. But it's interesting when you look back on your life and you really dig in, you start seeing where things happened. And at 57, I had come to a point of being broke and broken on the floor, drinking too much. Husband had left, had a couple of relationships that blew up before that. And so just lots of negative things were happening. I was $140,000 in debt. I didn't even know if I would have like a roof over my head in maybe a month. And I was always good at making money, but I was really good at spending money also. But what happened was that these negative behaviors just continued and started when I was a young girl. And a lot of times, as children, we learn what we live. And what I learned is, first off, my mom was an alcoholic, so she basically paid no attention to me except for to get me out of the room at any age. My siblings were much older than I was, and so they were pretty much gone out of the household in a lot of ways because, so I was kind of grew up a single kid. My father basically, he was very mentally unemotional, and I'll preface that with so that people understand what that really is. For me, it was when he gave me a birthday card, it was "Happy birthday, Mr. Jack M. Love." So it was never dad. It was never "I love you." It was never so. And he was always gone. So there was a mental abandonment. I mean, I always had a roof over my head. I always had food to eat, but I was basically grew up on my own, alone, and kind of had to figure out things for myself because I had no inspiration, no encouragement. Because when I grew up, there basically was like, want to be a nurse or do you want to be a secretary type of thing. It wasn't pushed to go to college in the 60s, 50s and 60s. It wasn't pushed to do that. And then, but yet on the other side of it, it was, oh, you're a woman, you gotta be a strong, independent woman, you can do, type of thing. So there was a lot of mixed messaging going on in my life. But unfortunately, when you grow up, with that kind of behaviors and not have any encouragement or inspiration or discipline or even any tools to actually guide you into your teen years and in your 20s, which if you don't have those tools, that's when things can go awry. And in my instance, they went awry. So bottom line is during my 20s, a lot of things happened. I had sexual traumas. I was just looking for the daddy love that I never found. I was drinking, I was drugging, I was doing too many different things. And so this all led up to in my 30s and 40s that I just never knew how to change my behaviors. And these were negative behaviors. And as you probably know, or a lot of people know, when you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you always get the same result. So you have to learn how to, decipher that. So what the bottom line is that it was at 57, and after a couple of divorce and where everything hit the fan in my late 50s, I knew at that moment something had to change, because even at 57, I felt I still had a good portion of my life left, and I didn't want to be a bag lady. And so I had to make some decisions, and so I did. And so the last 12 years, 13 years almost, I changed my whole life around, but I did it one moment in baby steps and one day at a time and such, until I was it got into a place that I could start giving back and doing things for other people. So that's kind of the story. A little bit, maybe more to that, but that's a
Right.
little bit in a nutshell.
I hope this isn't a fatal error for me, but I'm putting a couple things together here. You're telling me that you're almost 70?
Yes, this month.
Wow. Well, first of all, congratulations and
Well, thank
happy
you.
birthday. But you don't look it, right?
Well,
And
thank
so
you.
it's incredible that, that you have, at 70 years old, you have that vigor and that joy, and you exude this passion to do what you're doing right now. And so, I mean, when you said 57, I was like, well, you don't even look 57, first of all. So there's that. But so I mean, there's so many questions, right? Like
Sure, ask away. I'm an open book.
you said you started making decisions,
Mhm.
right? And I'm really curious about, what were those decisions that you started, recognizing that you had to make? What kind of transpired to put those decisions even in your brain bucket to say, this is what I have to actually start thinking about?
Right. So when I was in my condo on the floor, into my second martini, you might say, crying and this and that. This may sound a little weird to some people, but to other people, they'll get it. I had this cat. Okay. I still have a cat, but I had this cat. This is a new one. Her name was Hula, and she had always been so soulful that it was amazing. It was like she had this thing about her that was caring and loving, and and there's some cats that I've had, they're not that way. Okay. So it was definitely something about her. But just a step back, my sister had passed away when I was 29. And she was like my mentor and my person who took care of me in the long run, because she was 10 years older than I was. And my parents weren't really there to, really lead me at all. So I always looked to her and as a mentor. And so I've always felt she's been near me and next to me. And I've always felt that. And I've always had good intuitions on that. And I'm much more spiritual than religious, so that everybody can understand.
Sure.
But it was that day, and it was September of 2009, I guess. Yeah, actually it's a little longer than I thought. 2009, that I was on that floor, and all of a sudden I was crying, tears were flowing, and I felt this something on my hand. I look over, and here's my cat Hula with her paw on my hand, and I swear some kind of energy, something happened that just kind of lit me up, and just warmth came through my body. And I heard this: you got to keep going. Do not give up. Take your power back. I don't know if that was the cat. I don't know if that was my sister coming through the cat. I don't know what it was, but all I know is it felt so strong that I literally actually had to write down 5 words, because 5 words came to my mind. And I didn't even know why. And I wrote down acknowledgement, forgiveness, mindset, accountability, and perseverance. And later I added gratitude. But those 5 words I just put on a piece of paper because I didn't want to forget them. And I had no idea. But that day was the day I made the decision. Okay, I got to be honest with myself, because the shit that's been happening this last 57 years have not been working. I'd make money, I'd lose money, I would get into relationships and I'd get divorced or lose the relationships. There was something I had to acknowledge, the fact that maybe, just maybe, I played a part in it. And that is one of the hardest things that a lot of people have to do within themselves, is to acknowledge that maybe they're not so perfect as they think they are. And it's really a hard one. It's, in fact, most people, and I was doing the same thing. I was compartmentalizing all of my traumas, compartmentalizing anything to distract my life from anything negative. So I could be this positive person and positive thing and this and that. But at home at night and in the dark, I was a darkness within me. So, it came down to the point that if I didn't change, if I didn't make some changes, I may not be here right now. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
And I just could not go on the same way. And I knew that I had the power within me because somebody upstairs or the cat told me I did. And you know what? Sometimes you just have to believe it. And one thing I've always had a good, was good at was intuition. I always had good intuition. Now, sometimes the head overlapped that intuition and made very bad mistakes. But when I always listened to my intuition, that's when things went well. So I said, I got to listen to this. And so I made the decision to start it first off, because I started connecting the dots with the words. And let me tell you, it didn't happen overnight. This happened over a period of, a few weeks to a month, trying to figure out what are these words for? What do I got to do? But I knew I had to do something. And the first thing I did is I had to acknowledge my negative behaviors. I had to acknowledge that I needed to open up the bills. I needed to see that I was in debt, besides putting my head in the sand and not thinking it would just go away, which a lot of people do. And I had to realize that I played a part in relationships. I had to realize, and divorces. I had to realize that, my history and how I was brought up is probably some of the reasons that led me to certain mistakes during my 20s and 30s and things, because I had no guidance. And there was a long list of acknowledgments, and that's really hard to do. Like I mentioned earlier,
Right.
To really write down your negative ways. Like maybe I'm a little more judgment than I thought I was. Maybe I judge other people. Maybe I think I'm not good enough. I had to admit all of this, and it's hard. I cried about a lot of it. It's like, I can't believe my list was so long. It's like, I can't believe all the things are wrong with me. But interesting enough, when you write them out and start bringing them to light, it releases you and gives you permission to move forward. And the other thing was I had to learn to forgive myself. I had to learn also to be able to forgive my parents, because in some ways I held my father not being there and abandonment and such to a higher standard. And yet I just was angry at him. But in so many ways, when you learn and start really learning about who you are and realize, wow, if I have flaws, gosh, maybe my dad had flaws, and maybe I just didn't know his story. And I didn't know his story because he never talked about his story. And his story was more horrendous than mine. So he thought just by giving money and putting a roof over my head and feeding me would be good enough. So that's how it started, was really, Brian, was the acknowledgement of my negative ways. And then I just chipped away at those, like the bills. And I had to learn about finances, and I had to learn to listen more than always talking. I had to learn to listen to other people, and so that I could be more intuitive for them too, because nobody is perfect. We all are perfectly flawed. And once I really got that into my mind, and I started changing the way I thought. And it's interesting, I just wrote a quote for a magazine. They wanted to know what your quotes, what kind of you live by. And one of mine was, and this actually really changed my life also, was a quote from Wayne Dyer, that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Yeah. And when I dissected that quote over and over again, because at first I was like, huh, but I dissected it. It's like, I needed to look at life from a different perspective. I needed to look at it from the ground up, maybe instead of than the sky down. I needed to look at other people's opinions and options and thoughts, and, and not just be so critical of them or critical of myself, and finding out the whys I was doing that. So there's a lot that goes into it, the whys and the learning and understanding, but there's also a lot of crying and like, I can't believe I did that. But you also learn that you can't change the past. You have the moment and you move into the future. So I took one baby step at a time and moved in and paid off the little bills first, and then got the bigger bills, and, just kept plugging away, where then I became in the black, and that even built more confidence. And I did it all on my own. At the time, there really wasn't the big podcasts to talk about things. Yep. And there was no people that I could only hold myself accountable, which is one of those words also that came into play. Yeah. I had to hold myself accountable because everybody else has their own stuff. They have their own life. and they don't have necessarily time, and it also, I wasn't even ready to tell people what I was going through either. I felt I needed to get through some things first before I could even discuss it, because I didn't want to have any negative things on me too. But I had to learn, and it was one day at a time.
What were the 5 words again?
Acknowledgement, forgiveness, mindset, accountability, and perseverance. And then I added in later gratitude as a number 6 bonus.
Sure. Yeah. It makes me really, well, it's always a curious thing for me. It's like when I work with people right now as a mental health coach, one of the things that I try and focus on is the development of what I call values, right? Other people might call them ethics, other people might call them principles. But what I see this, like it's very confirming to hear this story, because you're not just looking at acknowledgement and saying, I need to acknowledge, right? You're looking at acknowledgement and saying, how do I need to define my acknowledgement? How do I need to, where's the limits of my acknowledgement? Is this too much acknowledgement? Is this too little acknowledgement? And really diving into what those words really mean to you, defining them and preparing them for practical use, I think. And it's really a powerful thing to step into that, I think, attitude, right? That mindset, so we could say, and start digging into something that is so in front of us. This whole, we always know what acknowledgement means and forgiveness means, and perseverance and accountability, mindset, gratitude. We always know what they mean, but we don't really know how it means or what it means to us until we sit in the pocket and say, I need to sit here and find this and the limits of all of this until I get it before I can make any decisions that actually matter. Because when you do, you actually start to understand yourself. You actually become self-aware of, like, who am I and why do these words even matter to me, right? They didn't come to you for no reason. You've been thinking about them a long time, but they became so intrinsic to your process because in many ways, I think you sat down with the self-awareness of what they really mean to you, not what they mean to, Jack, who talked about acknowledgement in the corporate meeting 6 years ago, right? Like what they mean to you. How do you define them? That's really interesting to me, because it's something that I've talked about for 2 years now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always been really, even though I was terrible at English, when growing up, because I wasn't the best student in the world. I was always smart, but I was not the best student because I just didn't, I didn't put myself into that area, try to work very hard at it. But I've always loved words. And I always felt that words matter. And that not in just a generic sense, but words matter in the deeper sense. And so when people say things, and it's I don't like dissect their words or anything like that, but it's if you listen to people, you can actually read between the lines and hear between the lines what they're really saying. And that was, so the word listen became very important to me also, to not just listening to myself, because that's where you get that internal, affair with yourself and start loving yourself when you start listening to who you are. But I also wanted to have the opportunity to listen to other people, to hear what they said. What before, there was a lot of times, and I know a lot of people do this, is they're thinking while somebody else is speaking, they're trying to think of what they're going to say. So they're really not listening,
right?
Because they feel that they have to come back with something pretty quick or do something, where in reality, there's another word that I talk about a lot too, and it's called the pause. And it's letting other people talk and you listening to them, and then making a pause and evaluating what they just said before you actually speak. But the pause is also, I also talk about the pause as getting off the hamster wheel, because getting off the hamster wheel is another time that people need to take the pause. But you're right, the words matter. And so I take those 5 words seriously. And I mentioned to you earlier that I added gratitude, and I didn't add it in the way that a lot of people add it.
I'm
Um,
curious. I'm
yeah,
curious now
there's
because
some,
this has always been a conversation I've been wanting to have.
yeah, because you hear everybody, especially now, it's kind of like gratitude is the new word.
Right.
I'm so blessed, I'm so grateful, and I started dissecting that and I said, really? Okay, so what are you really grateful for? I mean,
Right.
what are you grateful for? Well, I'm just grateful. No, 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 no. To me, you have to really dig into the word and appreciate the word of what it really is, because anybody can be grateful and have gratitude and bless people and whatever. But you've got to
And
take that
still
word
hate their life.
and still hate their life. And I find that, and that's exactly where I was going, because you know what? Most of those people that said, I'm so grateful, but they hate their life.
Yep.
And so this is what kind of made me dig into it. And I do call people out on it a lot, especially my clients sometimes, like, but what does that really mean? You're grateful. Are you grateful for the fork that you have in your hand right now because you're eating at breakfast, or you get that caprese that you're eating that somebody else may not have? Is this something that, are you grateful for the roof over your head? Because there's a lot of people that have no roof over your head. Do you think about that? Or are you just grateful? So it turns it around on them. They're like, wow, yeah, I never really thought about it in that way. So you can't just use the word grateful. You have to go deeper into that word and feel it,
Yep.
not just say it.
It's always bothered me, like you talk or you listen to some of the bigger influencers online talk about gratitude. I've heard Oprah talk about it. I've heard, I can think of who else. There's been a few people have talked about it, but they talk about it almost as if gratefulness and gratitude comes first. And I really disagree with that, because in 2015, I was at a point where I almost committed suicide.
Mm.
And I had been to Afghanistan. So I had a lot of gratitude where I was like, I saw what could be, but then I was also in this place where there was a lot of generational trauma that I was dealing with. There was a lot of trauma that I was dealing with, grief. I had lost my father to suicide at 6 years old, brought all of these things to a bear. And I could recognize gratitude of like, I'm in America, right? Like I'm not dealing with what Afghans are dealing with, right? Like even now, right? Like, but back then it was still terrible. But that didn't matter, because if I were to look at gratitude, I would have just been pissed off. What I really needed to look at was, why was I not understanding of what my life was at the time, and in comparison to what it could be. Like I wasn't grateful for the opportunities that were coming to me. I wasn't grateful for, all the things that I had. What I struggled with the most, I think, was I had a lack of understanding of how to approach communication. Right. And so, where I was is I was silent for 19 years. I just didn't talk about the things I needed to talk about. And I was always fearful of expressing myself and sharing things, because I had already made assumptions that nobody was going to care. Nobody was going to be there. Nobody was going to know how to deal with it. And I could go on. There's a
I hear
list
you.
of things, right? Like I made all the excuses. And until I put the gun to my head and I was like, I'm going to end my life, I didn't have the ability to really look at what gratitude was. It
Right.
had to come, it had to be built, because part of, I think, gratitude is the development of something to be grateful for, right?
Yes.
It can't be just what is given to you. You can be grateful for life and still
Yeah,
hate it.
absolutely.
I think you need to be able to look at, what have I built? Because I look at my life now, the things that I have done in the last 7 years to completely transform my life, I now look at and I recognize gratitude. But it had to be built. I have to look at like the things I didn't have back then that I thought I never would have, like my wife, my soon to be daughter, right? I'm having a daughter here soon. My stepson, my dog, my home. Like I never thought any of those would exist for me, because I never thought I'd live past 25. I never thought I'd live past 20, 30 something. And now here I am 7 years later, profoundly helping millions of people, right? I can't even tell you how many millions of views I have. I can tell you how many millions of likes I have on TikTok,
Right.
but it's you don't understand gratitude until you learn how to build, how to create, how to craft, how to develop, all of those words that mean to build that foundation and grow who you are. And I don't think people really talk about that very well.
No, they don't. Because it just becomes words to them.
Yeah.
They're not defining the words, and they're just saying the words, and they're not feeling the words. And when I go back to that feeling, whether it be acknowledgement or gratitude or mindset or whatever, I found that in order to feel anything, and we're going to go back to that word pause, you've got to pause, and you've got to step off the hamster wheel. You've got to stop the monkey chatter. You have to be okay with being alone. I have friends that they don't want to be alone. So they're always like, hey, you want to go here? You want to go there? You want to go out to lunch there? And I'm like, no, I'm good, but they need something to distract them from their lives. And so for your people who are watching this or listening to this, I would just say, take, even to start, even 30 seconds. I'll even go 30 seconds, because everything is a baby step. Go into the bathroom and without your iPod, without your earbuds, without your music, without the kids, without anything, or take a walk without music. Because some people say, well, I go out and walk in the nature and this stuff. I said, yeah, but you got music on. You're distracting yourself. You missed half of the things. You missed that seal that was birthing and that seal over. So you've got to take it all up and go naked in your mind and in your mind. And when you do, I find that my clients come back and say, it was hard. I said, yes, it's hard. Everything is hard. It's going to turn out to be better. It's just because you're not used to it. You're just used to this chatter. So it's become normal. So the quiet is like not normal to you. So you don't even know what to do with yourself. I remember when I first started that, because I always, people would say to me, oh, you should meditate. And I'm like, oh my God, meditate. That means I got to put my fingers out like this, and I've got to like go into a trance, and I'm like, there's no freaking way I'm ever going to do that. Right. And I actually turned that word, and I kind of pegged my own word, and I call it quietation. And I ask people just to take 30 seconds or 2 minutes, anything, step away and pause and do nothing. And I find that they come back and they say, you know what? Because I give them a challenge for like 1 week. Do 1 minute, do 3 minutes. If you can do longer, great. If you can't, that's fine. But I would have to say 99.9% of them back who actually did the challenge come back and say, oh my God, I want to keep doing this because I love how it feels. And I love that even though it's hard, and I don't always like some of the things I'm thinking about, because they're actually finding out who you are and some of the things you don't like, and some of the things you do like. Because I always try to tell people, whenever you find something you don't like, there's always something that's good about you also. So don't forget that. And so it's amazing. They say it changes their life by just having some quietation, and they start thinking about things, and then they can get into the more challenging of acknowledging things and forgiving themselves, and learning about words and gratitude and the such, and breaking those words down. So those are not just words anymore. They're feelings. And you can address them, and it's just like I try to get people who always are saying to themselves, oh my God, I got to go to work today. Oh, I got to go to the grocery store. Oh, I got to go take the dog here. I said, why don't you say, I get to go to the grocery store. I get to go to work today. I get to spend time with my sister today. I get to do the laundry. Some people don't get to do that. So words, it's really thoughts and mindset and mind fitness, because I believe that the word mental is a harsh word for a lot of people. And it comes with a lot of backlash from the past of mental health. So I always like to call it mind fitness. And, because we do fitness on the body, let's continue to do fitness on the mind. So it all works together. The pausing, the words and the such, but it's important for people to realize that they need to dig into the words and really feel those words, like you were talking about gratitude.
Yeah. There's far more emotions than we have words. I think.
Mhm.
We don't have the vocabulary of the vernacular to have an educated conversation about what's going on within us.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that will always be the case. I don't think humans will ever have the capacity to fully express what's happening within. But as I think you grow and develop your vocabulary, you actually have the ability to start understanding more about yourself. But I kind of side with, Carl Jung and the idea that there's always a piece of yourself that you will never know.
Yes,
And
I couldn't agree more.
I think that's really important. I also kind of side with the idea with like how Jordan Peterson looks at things and says, there's a monster within you as well. And
Mhm.
I really find that to be true. There's always going to be hard stuff. There's always going to be dark stuff. There's always going to be things you think of like, I really hate that person, or really hate this, or I'd kill that person if I could, like,
Yeah.
that's always going to be part of life,
Yeah.
because I think we've kind of lost this undertone that we are still a part of nature, right?
Mhm.
Like we think we fit into society, and the reality is we've built society to fit us,
Yes.
and there's this natural part of life where we have these thoughts, these feelings, these responses, these reactions that go against what society has deemed normal or non-confrontational. And the reality is they actually are composed of these realities in nature that says we have to fight for what we for our needs. We have to support ourselves in some regards. And as a species, I think there's a lot of importance in putting emphasis on reminding ourselves we came from nature. And that doesn't mean everything has to be a fight, but we do have to remember that our responses come from a situation and a time, that we had to fight for things.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to quickly say on that, when you say come from nature, is it people, if people were to take a second and feel when they're outside, most of the time you feel like it grounds you,
Mhm.
right? Because nature is grounding because we are part of it.
Yeah.
We are part of that species. We're part of that whole thing. And that's why when we're out there and the ocean and different things, people think of different things grounded, but it's all comes down to nature that really grounds you. Not buying that car didn't ground me, just made me happy for 5 minutes, but it didn't ground me and make me feel good necessarily. But
Yeah.
you feel good when you're in nature in most cases. And 99% of the people feel good when they're in nature. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, that's what I'm saying, right? Like there's a love-hate relationship that we have with nature, as it is our provider, but it is also our destroyer. And
Mhm.
so we have to recognize that society is only a vessel in some regards. It's the vessel on the ocean, and nature is the ocean, and
Mhm.
she can be mild, she can be tempered,
Yeah.
and she can be a hurricane,
Yes,
and
you can be violent. Yeah.
absolutely. And there's there's important stuff that needs to be understood on both sides of that. What
Yeah.
happens when nature is mild, and what happens when nature is violent, because we're part of that. We
Yeah.
have that capacity too. And I just think, this conversation started with words, but it ultimately ends with behavior, right? And our behavior is fundamentally, demonstrative of what we're thinking, and
Oh,
then
absolutely. And
our
those
words,
behaviors,
right?
yeah, those behaviors become um, continuous if you don't understand them,
Yep.
especially if the now if they're good behaviors, that's fine,
If you can't put words to them, you don't have the capacity. For many people, you don't have the capacity to really make sense of saying this is either good or bad.
That's right. That's right. So it's like, so I encourage people to stop and pause and really, if you can, and you're not going to, it's okay to feel those bad and good feelings if they're whatever they are.
Yeah.
But, whether, even though you don't feel and you don't know really what's good and what's bad sometimes, it's okay to have those feelings. It's like when people lose somebody and they're going through the grief situation and they have the anger and the sadness and they're pissed off and they're, they want to kill somebody. And then they're like, just sad. And it's, you have to allow yourself to, in some ways, succumb to those those feelings so that you can understand them, or not. You're never probably going to understand them, but at least get started, because I know as for my process, I will always be on this journey. Some people say, oh my God, Patricia, you're so wise, you know everything, you really got your stuff together, your shit together, you got things together. I'm like, no, it's just one day at a time, girls. And I will never stop learning or taking a new path or the journey until I take my last breath. That's just the way it should be, I believe. I don't want to stop. I don't want to stop, helping my mindset be better, helping my body be better. I want to learn, no matter what age. And that's another thing, is that anybody is watching it, you might have younger people looking at this, but I was just thinking I need to do a podcast on the people that are not heard at all. This 55 and ups who think they're invisible, when in reality, it never stops, and it just gets better. It grows, and I learn more about myself. My God, but it's so intense inside there. There's so much going on between the mind and the body that you'll never know it all. But gosh, if you can just get yourself into a place where I found myself now is a place of peace, where every night when I go to bed, I feel I did what I could from what I knew today. I even go through my 5 words every day. I still use these 5 words all the time. And I acknowledge, is there something I need to acknowledge that about what I said to somebody or not said, or what I did, or even for myself? Do I need to forgive somebody or myself that I do something stupid? Because we're human, right? We do things. And then I go through that. Now the list is not like long like it used to be. It's very short usually, because it's just one day at a time. But it brings me to a point of, I think that most people just want to feel at peace. Yeah. It's just like when they're few minutes before their deaths, they just want to feel peaceful. And if you can feel that way, then that, to me, that's living. And I'm good. But tomorrow brings a whole new set of whatever is going to happen and how I'll respond to things. And I hope I get better and better at responding at things. But it is a journey. It's a path, and it's never ending. And I embrace it every day. It's kind of like, I remember people always say, oh, they're never going to change because they're, I'm too old to change. That's a famous thing. I'm like, no, first off, you're never too old to change. I'm one of those. Nobody's too ever old to change. You're never too old to do anything. You're never too old to live and do some passionate things you want to do. But what you have to do is not fight change and embrace change. And I have to say, and when I'll go back, and I'm, when you mentioned that, I don't look 70, there is a part of me that believes that even at a younger year, especially when you turn 40 and 50 for women and men too, instead of fighting it and stressing out over it, I learned to just embrace it. And so I called it like a celebration rather than, saying, oh my God, don't tell anybody, I'll be 39 for the next 30 years, type of thing. It's just that you embrace it. Like, you know what? Can't do a thing about it. This is who I am. This is the age I am. And I believe that because stress causes age. It causes sickness. It causes health issues.
It seems
a lot of things.
It seems as if, and maybe you can correct this assumption if I'm wrong. It seems as if you have no capacity. Well, you might have a capacity for it, but you limit the capacity for shame yourself. And I'm curious, how do you approach that conversation, right? Like, let's say you do something wrong, or you have done something wrong, to yourself, like either to yourself or to others. Like, how do you approach that conversation of shame? Because I think that's really indicative of stress, especially later on in life, like this building of, I've done all of these terrible things in my life. I should be ashamed. Nobody wants to take care of me because I've hurt everybody in my life. Like, how do you approach that conversation?
Well, that's where my word forgiveness came in, apparently, when as part of my 5 words, is that every day I do look back and say, did I feel something today that felt like insecurity or self-worth, or was I scared about something, and which, did I have a lack of confidence? And I will bring it up to myself. I talk to myself and the cat. I would talk to myself and say, why did that come up that way? What brought that up? And instead of kind of pushing it and like, oh my God, I'm so incompetent, or I'm so calling myself stupid, or, doing something dumb, I immediately will say to myself, well, Patricia, that didn't go quite as well. And you felt some things in there that you really know is not true. But you have to realize it's not true. Now, you may have said something wrong to yourself, but you didn't mean it. That was just something that happened in the past that you brought back up. And really, in reality, you know that it's not true, that you're not smart enough, because you are smart enough. So I try to counteract those things internally. And if I did something wrong that maybe to somebody else, or maybe said some bad words, who knows what I might have said, because I'm, again, human. I'll say, well, that wasn't the best way of putting that, internally. And, how can I do that differently? How could I have done that differently? And then I say, I forgive you. I forgive you, Patricia, for saying that and doing that. Is there something you need to say to somebody to make them feel better, because maybe you said something wrong? Maybe you need to say you're sorry. I actually have conversations with me in the evening when just to go over that day, so that I don't carry or compartmentalize that so-called shame that maybe I put on myself. Because what happens is, when you compartmentalize it and don't bring it up to yourself and talk about it, it festers. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I had a huge breakdown in 57, because I compartmentalized, my rapes in my 20s, my sister dying, the people that I was hanging out with in my 20s. I compartmentalized all of this stuff and never dealt with it. And then it just kind of blew up, because lots of things were happening all at one time. And it's like when you compartmentalize and put things in a bag, eventually that bag fills up so much that it's going to blow up. Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons every day I take them a minute, and we're talking a minute, 2 minutes. We're not talking like I'm sitting there for hours, like contemplating my life. It's like two or 3 minutes. I'm like, okay, did I feel, that I wasn't confident today? Did I feel insecure? And just kind of ask myself a question, and then realize to say, that's not true, Patricia. So get over it. Just take that out, taking it out of the bag and throwing it out, and place it with confidence. And amazingly, it makes you feel better. And amazingly, a lot of times I'll also counteract it with, but you also did something really good today. You bought somebody some coffee today. You paid something forward. Give yourself a smile and a pat on the back. And it's amazing when you don't have other people telling you like, oh, you're so fabulous and you're wonderful and this and that. You got to also be your best friend, your own best friend. Because sometimes we have to hold ourselves accountable, and we have to give ourselves our own kudos sometimes. Yeah. But I forgive myself. And you say it sometimes out loud. I forgive myself for thinking that way. I've had some interesting thoughts just lately about my brother. And we hadn't never been that close, because he was so much older, and I didn't like a lot of the ways he was dealing with his life and a lot of things he did. And now, in the last week, he's now diagnosed with terminal cancer. So we don't know if it's going to be alive in the next week or 6 months from now. And even today, I found that he was sent back into the hospital again, right before this podcast. And it's like, there's been feelings of going back and forth of like, oh, see, karma, type of thing, which that's the negative side, right? Yep. And the other side is like, you know what? But I know his story, and he, so, we have to forgive certain things and the such, so it's a back and forth thing. But every day you are having to talk to yourself and deciding, are you going to forgive yourself for thinking that and doing that, and say yes, and then you move on, type of thing. And as long as you can feel peaceful when I fall asleep, when I feel peaceful, I sleep well, I don't have the stress, and I wake up to a bright morning in the morning, because I just look at things differently. Like I said, that quote, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I try to look at them in different views and from different lenses in all areas, and it makes a big difference.
I imagine I imagine that didn't start out being, 1 minute every night, right? I imagine that over time, as you process through the big things, right? Rape is no small thing.
Mhm.
Grief is no small thing. Loss is no
Right.
small thing. Any kind of difficult relationship is no small thing.
Right.
That you've been able to almost make this process more efficient. Now,
Oh yeah, I used to throw pillows and throw.
right. I'm curious, like when you first started this idea of having these conversations with yourself or with others, right? Because this
Right.
is also something that others kind of influence within us when we tell our best friend, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this, and I feel like I'm a dirtbag, and
Mhm.
nothing's going right for me." And they say, "Wait a second, you're not." And then here, this, and this is what you're doing great. What were the things that you really had to overcome with that discussion, that internal dialogue, or even external dialogue with yourself that helped you kind of get to a point where you could actually say to yourself, you do need to forgive yourself for this. You do need to get over this, right? There's nothing you can do about this. How did it become so simplified now? Because obviously you're 12, 13 years into this. Um, what helped you through that process?
Well, and again, it definitely was a process, and I think in the long run, because I don't think anybody ever completely fulfills that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's never going to be perfect. Okay. So I don't want everybody to think like, oh yeah, you go from here to there and everything is all good.
right.
I believe it's a constant process, but I have definitely gone from, because at the beginnings, I had a lot of anger and I was pissed off. And I had to talk to myself, and again, it's like, why are you so angry? And it would come out in even road rage back in the day. We're like, you're pissing me up, man, get off my tail. And I'm like, oh my God, but there was so much internal things that I never uh felt. I just didn't allow myself to feel. I didn't allow myself to feel. That was
Yeah,
the bottom line. I didn't allow myself to feel at all. And so when it came out, and I didn't really understand where all these things were coming from. I'd be happy, and then, but I was never diagnosed as depressed. It would come out though as like happy, and then I'd be so pissed off, and I'd be, like your mother, and I would just do all kinds of things. And like I said, I would throw pillows and throw things, and I realized that when I kind of got to that point after 57, that those are some of the things I needed to work on, because they weren't benefiting me. In fact, they were tearing me apart more than anything. So it was a very hard, probably first year of really getting to the point where I could forgive the rapists, because I was raped twice, raped by a stranger by a gun, and then raped by my boyfriend who thought I was cheating on him, and he beat me up and threw me in the hospital. So I was in the hospital. But I had to get that anger out to a point that said, okay, that anger really is, I'm allowing that person to hold on to my energy, and he's got power over me. And that pissed me off also when I started realizing that, like, he's causing it, but he doesn't even know what he's done. He doesn't care. He might even be dead. It doesn't know. So I had to really come to a place of, I'm not going to let these people who hurt me in the past, who created inside me a distrust in life, distrust in people, my losing my self-esteem, my self-worth, because now I have a choice. And I use that word choice a lot in my life. It's like, I'm choosing to not allow that to anger me. I'm going to realize that that person probably has his own story. And when I start thinking about people in the aspect that I don't know their story, I don't know if he was raped and maybe incested when he was a boy. I don't know that. So he's just acting out, and I don't know that. So I can't judge. So it's not that I forget it. It's just that I allowed myself to forgive these types of people or their actions, because it was serving me no purpose to be angry at them, because I didn't know what the story is. It's kind of like, I always think when people, women and girls and men and stuff, they judge people before they know anything. It's
Mhm.
just like, I was on a podcast with somebody, it was a panel, and one of the ladies she stepped out and kind of assumed something about me. And I didn't call her out on it at that moment because I didn't feel it was the place and the time to do that. But I felt, like already there was a judgment, and the judgment was because I was a blonde, blue-eyed girl that I probably have, plenty of money and I'm very comfortable. It was a big assumption, and on her part. And I thought about it that night, and I'm like, well, she just doesn't know my story, but it's sad that she didn't want to even get to know my story without me, judging first. So a lot of people judge, and then they make assumptions, and then they make decisions based on things that aren't true.
Right.
And so you have to learn to realize and let go of some of that, because I find that it just takes more power from you and more energy. And I have to have my energy in order to live for today and move forward. So that's one of the reasons that I do have those conversations with myself every night, because I want to be in that moment and live for tomorrow. I don't want to live in the past. I don't want to forget the past, but I also want to acknowledge that past and know that I was angry. And it took a while to move through that. But again, once I realized that I don't know any of their stories in reality of why they treated me that way. And, because I also, growing up in a man's world, a lot of ways, I dealt with a lot of men that was very sexist and very everything like this. And I had to learn too that this is just the time that they just don't know better sometimes. And so instead of holding on to some of these things, which a lot of people do, they hold on to grudges, they hold on to, and they're angry all the time. I found that didn't serve me at all. It just didn't serve me. So, and I still get upset if somebody tailgates me, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But I just look at it in a different way, and just like, okay, rather than trying to slam my brakes on and trying to prove something, I'm going to be like, it's going to let it go and move over, because it's going to end badly.
I always kind of look at it as this base fundamental idea of interaction, right? When we have an interaction, if you bring something to the table, depending on what it is, it's gonna influence the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you bring anger, you're going to get a response.
Yeah.
And more often than not, right? And I think a good example of this is the idea of toxic masculinity and how women have traditionally looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say it's not wrong, but what I think has come to the table as you get the response from men that you get because of how you brought it to the table.
You know what? I'll stop you right there, because I have a great story on that one.
Go for it. Yeah.
On my first husband, what happened was we'd been married, and I kind of knew that I'd made a mistake, and I decided to ask for a divorce. Well, I had a cat named Shimin at the time. I'm a cat lover, as you can probably see.
What's the name?
Shimin, Shemen.
Okay.
Shimin. Supposedly is from Turkish lovers, Shimin and Rodrigue or something. But anyway, and I love this cat. I brought this cat into the marriage. This cat was my baby. It's like, when dogs are somebody's baby, this was my baby. So when I left, he says to me, I'm keeping the cat, which immedately inside of me brought up nothing but anger, and like, I wanted the words explicit that were gonna come out of my mouth. I made the decision that I had learned that don't fuel people. So what I said to him is, I said, that's okay, you can have her. Knowing inside myself that I knew that he would not keep the cat. But I found that, and especially when you know people, they just want a reaction from you.
Mm-hmm.
They just want some kind of reaction, whether it be man or woman or whatever.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get to you somehow to make you happy, to just dig you. And at that time, I was starting to really getting into more of learning about myself a little bit. It was before I was 57, but I was still starting to kind of learn about things. And I did not fuel him. He kept trying to get at me constantly, like, I'm taking the cat. Oh, I left the cat, he's not being, I know he'd feed the cat. It was just certain things. And finally, like 3 months later, he calls me and says, you can come and get your cat, because he couldn't get the reaction that he wanted. And I find that if people are, especially in relationships, if you don't fuel them, they have nothing to react to.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not easy.
No.
It takes a lot of willpower. And even in fights, I find that tell people, like, take a pause.
Right.
Take a pause, because I know from learning about myself that if you anger me, I might say something that I don't mean,
Yeah.
and it does come from a place that you probably do mean it, but in reality, you don't really mean it, because it comes from from one of those areas of behaviors, of stories that probably was from way back when. And it really might not even be about them. It just triggered something from your past, type of thing. So I find that just by pausing and saying, I'm going to step back, tell you what, thank you. I'm just going to step away for a minute. Thank you. It's amazing, and calm yourself down. So yeah, it was you never want him to react. So continue on with your story.
No, you're absolutely right. Like that's just a representation of this. It's toxicity, right? It's this, I want you to feel something because I'm upset. Right. And I was talking about like toxic masculinity, and it almost became reversed, right? Where it was almost toxic femininity attacking toxic masculinity, and nothing was done for quite a long time. It was just a constant political battle and a constant online debate. Whereas like how we looked at it now, I think through TikTok is a lot more appropriate, because we've gotten past that emotional aspect. Is we're looking at narcissism. We're looking at the idea of what are toxic interactions within a relationship. And we're starting to see men have this upbringing that have built this, while women have this upbringing that have built this. And these two different focuses become, problems. They become problematic. And so now I think we're looking at it and saying, I don't care whose fault it is, but here's the problem. And when you can actually do that, you actually have a foundation to start building on, of saying, there's, you could certainly blame narcissism, right? And the legitimate narcissists out there, because sometimes I think that word is overused. I think people have narcissistic tendencies, but to be a narcissist there's quite a lot of issues you have to really, centralize. But to have those, like, to talk about interaction is a really deep and intricate subject. And we like to label people and blame people and judge people and all the things that we've already talked about. And that is not beneficial. That doesn't serve a good purpose of, like, how are you supposed to have a conversation when you say you have all of these problems? What initially, right? When you respond to that, you're going to be upset, because you're like, if that's the first time you've heard about those issues, because maybe, and especially like as men, I think I can actively speak about this. As men, one of our goals, and one of the things that we were built on, was you have to provide for your family. You have to provide, right? And so what we do is we put our heads down and we do the work, right? And then 12 years later, your wife turns to you and say, I want a divorce because you're never around. And it's like, what the fuck, right? Like that's the instant reaction. And so how do you expect, if what you do as a woman is say, you are the problem because you are never around, you're a waste of a father because, you bring all of this attack to this person. If you expect a response that's supposed to be legitimately peaceful and calm, you're not going to get it.
No, because it triggers.
Exactly. And so that can just set off a complete miscommunication. And not to say that's women, it's both, right?
Oh, it's both. It's totally both. It's totally both. And there's some people that use that to their advantage too, by the way. It's
absolutely.
And I totally agree with you. If we could just find some common ground, and it's not easy because talking and communication is hard. But for example, I've been in prior to coaching, and I also, I was doing coaching before too, but I was in real estate for many, many, many years, negotiating. And we're talking about two people that are emotionally distraught. It's a very stressful thing to do and buy a home.
Right.
You find out the communication of the lack of communication between not only the husband and wife sometimes, but also between the parties.
Right.
So you have to learn that, there is a common ground, but we have to sit down and talk about it in a way that you get something and I get something, and we can mutually have a happy ending. And, and again, you have to address it in a way. And that's why sometimes third parties and coaches and therapists, are out there, because a lot of people aren't able to do that. But if you could really think about it and just realize that that man has a story, just like my father. His story was he didn't have a real father that helped him to treat him. So he was poor and broke and beaten up. But he knew that when he was going to have a family, he was going to put a roof over their head and make sure they had food. And that's all that he cared about. And he worked very hard of it. And of course, the young child thinks, my daddy's never home. My daddy doesn't love me. So it's understanding that, let's see what that story is first.
Yeah.
Where is this coming from? And why do you do this? And why does she do this? And that. So again, it's about communication and a common ground. And it's not easy. And I don't want anybody to think that any of this is easy, but I will tell you, it's freaking worth it.
Yeah.
And just knowing who you are and understanding the who you are inside and more every day, the better you get at it. Yeah. And the more exciting it becomes when things move and opportunities open that you never thought they would, because you kind of changed the way you look at things.
I think it always, and with that last statement, if you change the way you look at things, I think that fundamentally starts with empathy, right? All of this fundamentally starts with that. Because when you can have empathy for people, right, you can look at them and say, I'm going to change the way I look at things because I want to see what they see, right? And, you get kind of this interchange between us, like, I'm trying to learn about you and you're trying to learn my perspective. And so we're actively listening and responding in a way that actually functions within the conversation to prolong it and extend it and to deliver information to both of us.
Yeah.
And
it moves both of us forward in a
right.
good way. When you step out of this and we're done with the podcast, I can say, wow, I learned so much.
Yeah. It was fun, right?
Yeah.
And even then, like, you also have to have the ability to say, fuck you, right? Like the ability to have that savage kind of be able to pull out when I say something like, Patricia, you're terrible, you're the worst human being ever. You should have the ability to say, well, fuck you. I don't need this, right? I'm going to take a pause for a second and think about this. That was pretty,
while I take a step away.
Right. Like you know what? Maybe this isn't the right thing for us to do. Maybe this isn't the right thing for us to talk about. Right.
Right now, your type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that ability to kind of take that step and that's accountability, right?
That's accountability, is taking that step. But also realizing that not everybody is for you.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like, how many times, I really work on a lot of energy, because I believe energy is a lot of different things. And you either, everybody has energy. Now, there's some people who have low energy, versus high energy. But it's like walking into a bar, let's say a bar. And that all of a sudden you get this weird feeling about these people over here, and you just feel negative energy coming from it. And you're like, ooh, I think I'm going to go this way. And it's understanding that you're not going to have everybody like you or love you. And that's okay. Because I don't want to like and love everybody. It would be too busy for me, So it's important to make people realize that you don't have to get along with everybody. That energy just may not be, the right fit. And maybe down the line, it might be. Maybe their planets will, align somewhere, who knows? But at this point, it doesn't really work. And you just have to be okay with that. Well, that's okay. That's right. Okay. I'll move on.
Absolutely. Well, Patricia, I feel like we could talk for hours, but I think we both have things to do quite soon. And so I want to,
it's been fun.
Right. I know. I mean, I feel like we could continue this conversation for a very long time.
Oh, maybe we'll do it again next year.
Absolutely. I would love to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your book. So I want to give you an opportunity, not only your book, but your app, because that's one thing we haven't been able to talk about yet. Could you give me a summary of, or give the people a summary of, what's your book about and what does this app do for people?
Well, first off, here's my book, Seen and Unheard. And it's a memoir of my life. but it's also a book that a man can read, men do read, women read, because they know somebody who has this, maybe the situation or the story. And so they can say, it can be your spouse, or it could be a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a friend. And it just takes them through it, whereas it gives real life stories that say, but you can change this. You can do something differently. And if you change the way you look at things, and it also, so it gives little avenues of how to do that throughout the book. And so, but it is about a lot of time in my life of being seen and unheard, as what you actually talked about at the very beginning, where up to 19 years old, you felt unheard. And same with myself. And you feel like you're just putting your head up against the wall. Nobody's listening to me. I'm invisible. So it's for those people that believe they're invisible. It's not true. So that's about that. The app itself, it's just recently launched. I'm excited about it. You know, always launching an app is always cut, you know, the ups and the downs and that too. But you know, it's so important to me, because when I was going through this at 57, when I was broken, one of the things that I did not have was money, right? And, you know, I had to learn things on my own. And in reality, if I didn't have that $500 or to contact a coach, because I didn't want to call my friends, because I wasn't ready to do that. And so I didn't have $250 a month or $500 or whatever it might be. So I wanted to create a free app that if they want to upgrade, they can, into an affordable monthly app about building confidence, because I've always believed that confidence is freedom. So the more you can build your confidence up, the more freedom you have to do some of the things that you never have done, to be able to step outside that box. And then of course it all encumbers self-esteem and self-worth and not comparing yourself. But those are just little added, you know, extras to it, just building the confidence. So it's called ConfidentU, and you can go to the Apple Store to download, or Google Play. So feel free to sign up for free and see how you like it, because I have a series of things you can go through from the very beginning. So and it's all about my actually my 5 words. So it'd be really great for them to go through it for free. So absolutely. So thank you for asking about that.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping some people find it. You know, I know there's people out there that listen to the podcast that really take a lot of value from it. And I know
Sure.
I've enjoyed this conversation. I think it's so incredible that we share that idea of, you know, how important words really are. And I want to push people to find you. So with that being said, let me ask you the last question, give you a chance to share your wisdom and your thoughts and your ideas on that. If there was one message, Patricia, that you could leave the world, what would that be?
Pretty simple. Pause. Take a pause. Take a pause from your life to find out who you are. When I say that, take a pause from social media, earbuds, you know, music, anything. Just take a pause for you. And so you can start finding out who you are. It's how you got to start. It's the only way to start. Got to get rid of the monkey chatter.
Too easy. Right?
I know, right? It's too easy. That's usually what it is. It's really easy. It's just a matter of taking action.
Yep. Well, Patricia, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it so very much. And we'll make sure all the links that people need are in the description and the show notes below. If you've listened this far and you've given us your time, I thank you very much. And we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.
Thank you.
And that is it.